So this is a 2017 Range Rover Evoque. And I wanted to give kind of a video review of it, and in some ways kind of catalog all of the problems I've been seeing. It's definitely been the most problematic car I've ever owned, and I know a lot of people say the quality's not very good and all that kind of stuff, but I've got actual physical examples I can show you. So your mileage may be a little different, but this is just kind of my way of recording what I like and don't like about the car and what kind of problems to expect if you do buy one. So the thing with this car that kind of irritates me are all the little tiny quirks and bugs that it has. For example, I just dropped my kid off. He opened up the tailgate and closed it. And the second he closed it, it now says the key's no longer in the car. The key's right here. It hasn't moved. It's been in my pocket the entire time. So why does it say there's no key in the car? Especially right when the tailgate closes. So when I go to source, not all the sources are available. I have one called 16G that's got music on it. It's grayed out. I've been driving for 20 minutes, so I have no idea why it's grayed out. Same thing with the media library. Can't play any of that music. Now, if I turn the car off and turn it back on, then most often they'll work again. So there's no real reason why it's broken and then suddenly fixed. Real irritating thing is that when you turn this car off, it doesn't actually go off. It just goes off until you open the door, and then it's still sort of off, but it's actually not off the entertainment system for another 2 minutes. I've been driving for about 5 minutes, and it's still booting. I don't know what it's doing, but it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I'm willing to bet it's not going to do anything until I get home. So for 10 minutes, it's going to sit here and do this. And what's even worse is once I get home, it's still going to do this for the next 2 minutes before the system shuts down. So, not going to fix it here. And here we go. After my appointment, everything reappears. Then it works. All right, so here's another thing that's kind of irritating. The brakes. Not even pressing the pedal. Okay. I've been driving all day. I don't know why they're squeaking like that. It's not rust, anything. But if I go in reverse, so I know what you're thinking. You're thinking those are the squealers, and the pads are worn, and that's why they make so much noise, and it stops when you hit the pedal. Well, actually, it doesn't stop when you hit the pedal, and this car only has 18,000 miles, and the brake pads have at least half of their pad left. So no, it's not a normal part of brakes. And it seems to be a well-known problem too, because when I got the car, they sent me a survey, and the survey was, what do you think about this, that, and do you have any of these problems? One of the options you can select was the brakes make noise. So I know that's what's going on. One more thing about sounds. Every time you go from park to drive, you hear this. That's the parking brake releasing. And every time you go from drive to park. So pretty much all day long, you're just hearing this. All right, here we go. It's gonna remote start in a few seconds. This is what it sounds like when it runs for the first time in the day. It's not really bad. It's just not quite as quiet as I want it to be. It sounds like there's an air pump doing something. Anyway. Reverse. course. All my neighbors know this car. So the other thing about sound, which I think is important in a luxury car, the crossbars above me whistle. So when I hit about 30 miles an hour, can you hear that? To listen to that all day long. I don't think they're made by Land Rover, but anyway, somebody at Land Rover designed them. So I wish it was a little more quiet. Another thing's kind of a pain about this rack is getting it on and off. Having this little peg line up with that slot there is really hard. It's practically impossible. And once you get in there, getting it off is a pain. The other thing is once you have both sides unscrewed, the part that little grabby part right here, it still doesn't come off. It's still locked in there. So what you have to do is actually take it partially apart. You slide this thing back, get a screwdriver. I don't actually have the right screwdriver, but it's this one. You gotta unscrew these things so that you can slide these things further apart like that before it sometimes will come off. Right now it's not gonna come off until I get the other side. But it's a huge pain in the butt. The other part is there's no markers here. So I have a cargo box that goes on here that has holes at very specific locations. So if it's too far forward or back, it won't fit on. So I have to use a tape measure to measure this distance to make sure it's in the right direction as opposed to the back one. So probably the biggest complaint I have about this car is the acceleration. It has a 245 horsepower engine, which is plenty. But the problem is the throttle response. And not specifically the throttle response, I would say more specifically, it's the time between when you press the pedal and when it actually goes. And I would say probably 80% of that problem is in the transmission. Now, I understand why they went for that 9-speed transmission. It has a very, very low first gear, which it never really uses. It only starts in second gear unless you manually tell it to be in first gear. And it has 4 overdrive gears, which means that in 9th gear at 60 miles an hour, you know, you're at 1500 RPM, which is good as far as gas mileage goes. So you get the performance of the low gears, and then you've got the fuel economy of the higher gears. But the problem is there's 9 ratios in between those two ends of the spectrum. It would have been so much nicer had it been 6 or 7 at the most. Because what happens is if you're driving along and you floor the gas, you have to wait at least 2 seconds for it to do anything. So I'm going to give it a try, and then I'll actually show you a demo of it. But here we go. Ready, set, go. 1, 2, there we go. So 2, maybe 2.1 seconds before it does anything. And most of the time what it's doing is it's thinking about what gear to select. And if that gear is 2 gears down, I'll actually show you this. When it shifts gears, it takes a full second to do any gear. And what's happening is that 2 seconds is going into one gear and then going into the next lower gear before it actually hits the throttle. So that makes it really difficult to drive, especially in traffic. So let's say I need to merge into the next lane and there's one small slot for me to get into. I can't actually do it unless I plan way far in ahead, because whatever thing I do, it's going to do nothing for 2 whole seconds and then suddenly take off, because it usually picks too low of a gear to do that. Even if I just slowly press the pedal like this, it's going to wait until I stop pressing the pedal before it calculates what gear it should be in and actually execute the command. So it is a huge challenge. And the thing is that the transmission is learning to do this. They call it transmission learning. It says it learns your driving style. They don't really say what for. And there are ways of canceling the transmission program. I've seen web pages where you can, turn the engine off and on and wait and then do this and that, and it's supposed to clear the transmission program. And it does actually make it a little bit faster, but this is a huge hack. I don't know why you can't do that, why you can't select your own driving style. And one theory I have is that this is actually a design, is that the transmission and everything can't handle somebody stomping on the gas. Because who knows, if you just floor the gas and it takes off right away, maybe it's going to break a U-joint or something. Okay, next, the instrument cluster. I don't like the design. If you look at it, the speedometer on the left, the numbers are spaced too far apart. So if you were to glance at the speedometer, like this, how fast was I going? It's kind of hard to tell. The other thing is the tachometer. I mean, of course, every good sporty car's got a tachometer, but does it really need to be that large? Because you don't really do anything with it. It's an automatic. Finally, the most useful thing on the display is the actual speed. And it's a tiny little font sitting up top. So it's the most useful thing that you use. You use it all the time to see how fast you're going, yet it's one of the smallest things on the entire display. So interior, visibility is a problem. So I'm 6 feet tall, pretty standard sized. I've got the seat all the way down, but see where the mirror is? I'm at a 4-way stop. Is there a car over there? I don't know. This mirror, you see all this space, black space, this is not used. So you may notice I'm in a different car. And the reason for that is that every year you need to get your vehicle serviced. An annual service, which is $500 to $600. Changing the oil, checking things, stuff like that. I don't know why it's so expensive. But the main problem is that it doesn't take a day, it takes 2 days. And they don't give you a loaner. They just call Lyft or Uber and give you a ride back home. And then you're without a car for a day and a night. Yeah, and then they will come, send a car to come pick you up. But when I did that, I told them about the acceleration problem. And I said, there's a good 2-second delay here between me pressing the pedal, which I've never heard before. So they did their service and they took it out for a test drive and then wrecked it. Not bad, but they tore up one of the front fenders, the front wheels messed up, there's a big, line down the side of the door, all that kind of stuff. So that's really irritating, especially at the beginning of ski season. It's January right now, and my ski vehicle is no longer in operation, and this car is not going to go skiing. So the part that kind of irritates me more about that, other than just kind of wrecking the car, is that they just said, well, sorry. And their policy is cost cutting, which means that you're going to have to work with this other person's insurance company and they will give you a loaner car. We don't do that. And it's like, wait a second, you wrecked my car and now I have to spend 3 or 4 days without a car because the other person hasn't reported it yet, or... So I talked to the main GM guy and he kind of saw my way here. It's, why am I incurring a loss of paying for a rental car because you guys wrecked my car? And so now I have this, not exactly a skiing car, but at least I'm mobile. Anyway, so that means it's going to be a little bit longer before I can actually finish all of my gripes about the car, because currently it's broken.